I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to go over 5 authors I'll be reading for the very first time in 2023. All of these authors are largely influential on the genres that they write in and have paved the way for a lot of the more modern works that we talk about and love here on YouTube and in our circles of readers. But these are 5 that I have kind of not, I don't want to say overlooked, because sometimes I save authors for a rainy day that I think I'll really mesh with. But these are authors that it's time. It's time to get into their works. It's time to expose myself to them and to see exactly what they had to say whenever they were writing. So a lot of these are a little bit older works, but I'm excited to get to all 5 of them, and I will be listing them, I think, in order of priority. Number 5 is going to begin with someone who has been instrumental in science fiction, has some of the craziest premises to books that I know of, and that is Philip K. Dick. And Philip K. Dick is responsible for one of my favorite stories that I've seen on screen, but I've never read the book, and that is Man in the High Castle. It was adapted to Amazon Prime. I already know what I'm going to see in the comments is that don't worry about the show. It had nothing to do with these books. But for me, I like the show. And even if the book is different, I'm excited to see what my experience is with it. I think that out of all the premises that he has, none of them are quite normal. They're all a little bit out there. And I mean, think about it, Blade Runner based off of his work as well. So he has been huge when it comes to innovative ideas in the science fiction genre. And it's time for me to read him, quite simply. The one I really want to get to this year is obviously Man in the High Castle, but I'm also going to try to fit in Scanner Darkly, and I'm also very interested in Ubik. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I've heard that that is one of his crazier works, and just a really interesting guy all around. I mean, people talk about a religious experience they had back in his life that kind of like ended up completely changing his entire life and his outview on things, and conversations with biblical characters. I don't know. I just know that the guy had a lot going on upstairs, and I'm excited to dive into his works and to see these ideas come to life on page. And 2023 is the year that that's going to happen for me. Do you like Philip K. Dick? Because I hear a lot of people describe some of his stuff as a little bit dry, but the people who seem to resonate with it kind of are enamored with his ideas. So I'm curious what you think. Let me know down in the comments below. Have you read Scanner Darkly or Ubik or any of these other works? I would like to know. Number 4, we're jumping back into the fantasy genre here, and this is for someone who I am very curious about reading because he is largely at odds with Tolkien, who has really kind of created the commercial genre that is fantasy. And this author has a bone to pick with that impact, and that is Michael Moorcock, which I'm going to be reading his Elric works. They re-released all of them in these beautiful illustrated editions and actually kind of put them in an order where it's legible, because for the longest time, the reading order for Elric was like, what? What do I read when? Because, you know, it's kind of vignettes and they jump around supposedly. But I've never read anything from Michael Moorcock except for his epic Pooh essay, in which he honestly slams Tolkien pretty hard. And while I don't agree with all of his criticisms of Tolkien and everything he was saying in that essay, I do think he has some really valid points and at the very least has something to say. So I'm curious to see what he brings to the table. If he is so strongly opposed to what became of the fantasy genre thanks to Tolkien, what does he have to offer? I'm curious. I know that Geralt of Rivia is supposedly very inspired by Elric, and among other things, there's like a connected universe here. I'm a little bit ignorant when it comes to more of the lore aspects of Michael Moorcock's work, but I do know that this is someone I want to read. I want to see what his impact was on the genre. When I had Tad Williams on the channel for Chatting with Nuts, you know, he said that that was one of the big influences on him. And then you can just kind of cover your eyes and throw a dart and you would hit an author who's been inspired by Michael Moorcock in the fantasy genre. He's been instrumental, and I think a lot of people do resonate with what he does. So it's time to get to the bottom of it. I need to know where I stand with Michael Moorcock, who, you know, talked a big game in Epic Pooh essay, and I'm excited for it. Number 3 will probably be an author that you'll see on my need to read for 2023, where I kind of lay out maybe, you know, 5 to 8 books that I'm 100% committed to. And that is Lois Mcmaster Bejold. This author has been recommended to me a bazillion times. Christopher Rocchio recommended Lois Bezold to me whenever he came on Chatting with Nuts. And also the fact that a lot of people that seem So the people who tend to like Robin Hobb is said that you'll like Lois Mcmaster Bejold. I don't know if that's true. I've heard some people say that's not at all the case. I'm not really too concerned with that comparison. Looking at her body of work, which also does go to sci-fi and fantasy, the premise around her series seem interesting to me enough to where I don't really care about the comparisons to Hobb and whatnot. That's not why I'm reading Bejold. I'm reading her because she is definitely held in high regard by other authors, which is a pretty good indicator that I'll probably enjoy it. But also on top of that, it just sounds interesting. And I like slower, methodical fantasy. And from what I understand, that is exactly what she gives you and keeps it relatively brief as well, which is kind of nice. She's not writing these 1,200-page tome book ones, which is great. Brevity is, a plus in this coming year where I have to wrap up like 13 series, but I will be starting with Curse of Chalian. I believe that is the name. And I will see what I have in store for me when it comes to Bejold. I'm hoping for slow, low fantasy with a lot of character development and hopefully something that gets wrapped together and maybe exceeds just the tropes and the campiness that can come in the fantasy genre. I'm hoping that I take something away from that, which, for all intents and purposes, I think I will get from Bejold. So we'll see where she stacks up on my all-time list. I have very high hopes. I think out of everyone that's on this list, this is the one that I'm most confident that I'm going to click with, and it's just a feeling, and it's just kind of a vibe I have going forward about Bejold's work. Number 2 is one that I know a lot of people who have watched the channel for a long time are finally going to let out an exhaled breath that they didn't know they were holding in relief that I'm finally going to read this author, and that is Gene Wolfe. I will be reading Book of the New Sun, which is where I'm going to start with his works, but I plan to read probably everything that he's ever published, because even if it isn't my favorite series of all time, I have never heard such unanimous praise for an author in the way that they write their books. I mean, we could talk about prose and style, but just supposedly the way he approaches narrative and world building is like no other. Most people say that Book of the New Sun is one of the most challenging, yet one of the grandest achievements in science fiction and fantasy, and is recognized outside of, our echo chamber and our circle as Gene Wolfe just being, a master of his craft, as I love to say. So Gene Wolfe's going to happen in 2023. I'm not pledging for all of Book of the New Sun, but I will be starting with book 1 in that. And I just want to see the madness. I want to embrace it. I know a couple people close to me that have read it this past year, and while they didn't love Book of the New Sun, they loved what he was attempting to do and what he was executing on, and also just are kind of in awe that someone's mind could work this intricately. So I want to test myself and feel like a big idiot when I read Gene Wolfe. And as someone who does like to write, I'm excited to see the way Gene Wolfe approaches it that makes it so notable from even his detractors having to give him, the nod of the hat and kind of like, yeah, he's great. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll get it. Maybe I won't, but I am going to give it a good old college try. Number 1. This is an author that I think is so important and has written a lot of science fiction. But the thing I love about this author is the fact that they have written over decades. And the genre has changed. The world has changed. But it seems like the resonance of this person's work has lasted throughout all of this and is still talked about today and held in such high esteem, and that is Octavia Butler. And I will be starting with the Parable series, which I believe she wrote in the 90s. She did write some things prior to this and obviously after this, but the Parable series is supposed to kind of revolve around the idea that the world has fallen apart. I want to say apocalyptic, but I don't know if it's that extreme, but it's essentially the fact that humans were not good environmental stewards and we have let everything kind of just go to shit. And I think that that isn't the most unlikely scenario in the world. I think that this is probably going to hit home and get me in the feels a bit and get my mind working. But Octavia Butler has just been so inspirational to so many young authors and is, again, kind of mentioned with the heavyweights of the genre and outside of fantasy and sci-fi. This is someone who is recognized kind of globally as a force. But Octavia Butler is a voice that has not just lasted through the 70s and the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, but I believe will probably last for many, many decades. And I say that without ever reading a page from her, because when I hear people talk about Octavia Butler, there's something different going on whenever they're talking about it. It's not just, you know, your flavor of the week, the sensational stuff that we read that plays to maybe the tropes and whatnot that we love. And it's not just original ideas, but it's the whole package. It's something that extends beyond that and beyond the genre. And I don't know, when people talk about Octavia Butler, I tend to listen. And I think that she sounds inspiring, but yet realistic, and is not going to pull punches. And I think this is an author that is absolutely going to impact me. And that's what I want when I read. You know, sometimes I want to have a good time, but at other times I want someone to bring it down to a very real level. And I'm excited to see how that lands with me. And I will be starting with the Parable series. So I would love to know if you've read Octavia Butler, what your experience was. Let me know in the comments, not just what you thought of Octavia Butler and Gene Wolfe and all this, but what are your top 5, top 3, top 1? It doesn't really matter. Let me know, are there authors that you're reading for the very first time in 2023 and why? I would love to know why, because it's always interesting why people end up picking things up. And honestly, a lot of these on this list, the reason why they're being picked up is because they were influential to works after the fact that I really loved. And I love kind of going through the lineage of like what inspired my favorite authors. So another author that's on here, and this isn't going to be a number, but like Faulkner, right? Definitely had a huge influence on George R. R. Martin, among other, like a million other people. But I've kind of been working my way back in George R. R. Martin's influences. And I read Jack Vance, I read Roger Zelazny, I read Tad Williams, and Faulkner happens to be the next one. But all these authors have been listed by someone that I admire as an influence. So we're going to find out you know, what makes them tick. And hopefully there's something there for me as a reader that I latch onto as well. And I can kind of build this lineage of my reading journey. So with all that said, I'm looking forward to the new year. I'm looking forward to some new experiences, and I would love to hear about yours down in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit like. It helps the channel out tremendously. If you love to think about subscribing to all kinds of bookish content here on the channel, there's a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. And a big thank you to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Lauren Henrik, Kai, Simon, Oscar Stewart, Stephen R., Akaika, Amanda R.J. Shaw, Nicoletta Tanner, Jennifer Garrick, Frank C., Evie Fever J., Sarah Pat, Kevin Ryan, Michael Terrence, Wade, Darren, Taylor D., Derry, John C., Boss Machin, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Noel, Amanda L., Kyle, C. Scott, Steve Talks Books, and Caitlin, and Dylan M. Thank you all so much. You're the best.